Welcome back to another bite-sized episode where I'm going to be exploring what burnout is, how neurodivergent burnout and neurotypical burnout are different, and how they can both lead to chronic illness long-term. I talk about what causes it and, most importantly, what can help and not help. Thank you for tuning in to the Calm Your Nervous System podcast, where you will learn to regulate your nervous system, not just calm it. I'm your host, Jenny Adams, and I'm a somatic coach who has recovered from debilitating ME and trauma. Alongside my guest experts, I'm here to share tips, stories, and debunk jargon, what is somatics anyway, about how you can regulate your nervous system so you don't have to live with chronic illness, burnout, or debilitating trauma for the rest of your life. A joyful life is possible. So first of all, what is burnout? You've probably heard this term thrown around. You might have certain thoughts about what it is depending on your own life story and where you're at right now and why you're listening to this. So burnout is a term that was first coined by somebody called Herbert Freudenberger in 1974. And it can be a state of physical and emotional exhaustion due to prolonged stress. So this can be due to being overworked, under-challenged, or neglected, or things like social burnout if you are introverted. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes neurotypical and neurodivergent burnout slightly different. And when I talk about neurodivergent, I am talking mostly about ADHD, potentially some autism burnout as well. And neurotypical is anyone who doesn't identify with any of those things. And everything is on a spectrum as well. So autistic burnout syndrome was what neurodivergent burnout was once known as. And this is also to do with chronic stress. And the key thing that I feel that makes neurodivergent burnout different is to do with masking and the level of expectations that we put on ourselves as neurodivergent people, and also a lack of adequate support. So this can be for typical or divergent. So essentially, if we take chronic stress, we add masking, we add a high level of expectations, and we don't have the right support or adjustments that we need in life, we're going to burn out. So if we're looking at a neurotypical picture now, women have a higher level of burning out than men. I've looked at stats and they vary, but all of the stats point to women having higher burnout levels than men. And women are also, I think we make up to 80% of people with chronic illnesses. So women are 4 times more likely than men to have ME, CFS. So let's go back to what is burnout. So neurotypical burnout would be classified as things like chronic exhaustion, unable to ask for help, a lack of motivation, change in mood, things like headaches, gastro issues, so gut problems, things like IBS, insomnia, shortness in breath, overwhelmed, and can be quite snappy and quite angry. Emotions are rising to the surface quite quickly. So you can have all of those things. You can have some of those things. You might be able to identify some of those. And neurodivergent burnout can also have all or most of those examples as well. But what makes neurodivergent burnout slightly different is the sensory element that comes into it. So generally, us neurodivergent folks are highly sensitive, generally. We are more sensitive to what's going on around us. So when we're burnt out, we would have a reduced sensory tolerance. So things like bright lights and noises, smells, just senses in our surroundings we're not as tolerant to them. We can get executive function overload. So that's our prefrontal cortex. That's all of the organization, planning, basic daily tasks, memory, emotional regulation, that's all of the stuff that comes under executive function. And when that gets overloaded, that stuff's not going to be working so well. Things like our RSD, our rejection sensitivity gets higher. And we'll also lose things like skills. We just aren't able to do things that we were able to do before. Neurodivergent people, we might withdraw socially. We might be struggling to communicate or lose it altogether. And then going back to the daily tasks, just really struggling with things like basic hygiene and the basics of feeding yourself day to day, really, really basic stuff. And then shame that comes with not being able to do those things. And we're no longer able to mask. So what actually causes this? And this can be a very easy way of looking at this, is that the demand on our system is higher than our capacity. So we're able to hold, to manage a certain amount of stress, and not every stress is bad, but just the day-to-day stresses of life, if we are not offsetting that stress, if we are not supported, etc., and that demand becomes more than we can handle, and that happens long term as well. So that could be over weeks or months or even years, that demand get pushing up and up and up. And we'll all have different levels of where the final straw is. And Freudenberger describes the state of being burned out as becoming exhausted by making excessive demands on energy, strength, or resources. So essentially, we don't have the resource to be able to deal with the situation at hand. And what's actually going on inside our bodies? So when we are burnt out or burning out, we're producing more cortisol, which is a stress hormone. We're also producing more adrenaline. And this will then put us into a chronic state of dysregulation. And when we've got these hormones running around our system for a long time, they turn into chronic illness. And what makes neurodivergent burnout slightly different to neurotypical burnout is that generally, in a neurotypical person, they are able to alchemize those hormones quicker and reset those hormones, whereas it's a little bit more tricky if you are neurodivergent. And when we've got those hormones, that cortisol and adrenaline running around us for a long time, we end up having things like sugar cravings from high cortisol. We can put weight on in certain places. Our blood pressure goes up. So there's all of these things, and this isn't even talking about nervous system dysregulation. All of this stuff can happen, and we are in that chronic survival state of probably a sympathetic or a dorsal, so your fight, flight, or freeze. You're stuck there. You're probably not getting into a ventral state very often, and therefore your body isn't able to go into a healing state because it feels like it's under threat constantly. And if you can imagine, you've got something like a lion chasing you. You want that adrenaline, you want that cortisol, you want to be able to run away. And then once you've run away and you found safety, you can come back to some kind of equilibrium. What we're not designed to do as humans is keep running from that lion every single day for years and years on end. So my own journey, I burnt out from not having ADHD diagnosed. I didn't understand I had it until a couple of years ago. And I was therefore masking and having to be constantly aware of what's going on in my surroundings. How can I seem more palatable? How can I people please? How can I fit in here more? Why am I struggling so much with simple tasks? All of that stuff is exhausting. And then I'm almost speaking a different language to the people around me, to my management. They are projecting onto me that, I'm just being lazy. Why can't you get into the office on time? And all of this stuff. And there's so much shame that comes with it. So living like that, I could feel it in my gut now. Just this horrible feeling of stress. And we are not designed to stay with that stress for a long time. So what is the difference between a neurodiverse burnout and ME/CFS? Because I am seeing probably 80% of my clients that come to me for one-on-one coaching, who the symptoms are that of ME, CFS, and 80% of them, I would say, have some form of neurodivergency. So a lot of them are women, and women with traits of things like ADHD and some autistic traits. And often I'm the first person that has actually asked these sorts of questions. Do you think you might have ADHD? Do you think you might be autistic? And I'm seeing a link between people that are getting very ill with ME/CFS and undiagnosed and unsupported ADHD. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in common and what's different specifically about neurodivergent burnout and ME/CFS. Because in my mind, how I see things is we go through a prolonged amount of stress. We aren't able to, for whatever reason, alchemize that stress that then turns into burnout. And then if we keep pushing and we don't do anything about that burnout, it then leads into chronic illnesses like ME/CFS. And often when we're in that burnout state, something might come along like COVID or glandular fever, something triggers a response within ourselves, and then it turns into ME/CFS. Again, like the final straw that our body's just like, no, I'm done, cannot handle anything else. So first of all, what is neurodivergent burnout? So I would say this is to do with executive function fatigue. So things, like I said just now, organizing, planning, daily tasks. It's also getting into hyperfocus a lot. And if you notice that you're in the only time you can do work is in hyperfocus, that is also a positive dysregulation, because are you aware of being hungry? Are you aware of needing the toilet? Are you aware of the temperature? Or are you just in the zone and you're there for hours on end? Masking and trying to meet expectations. And often there's more sensory issues. So ME/CFS, I would say the key traits of that are slightly different to the neurodivergent burnout are post-exertional malaise, PEM, and it's pain. So pain in joints, muscle fatigue and aches, that flu-like feeling. And it's often triggered by either an infection or something highly stressful that's happened. There's also like the swollen glands and the sore throat and the bunged up nose. And one of the key diagnostic criteria is that 6 months of persistent fatigue as well. So what do these two things actually have in common is things like not being able to live authentically. How many of us that are either ADHDers or we have chronic illnesses are people pleasers? We minimize our needs. So there's that whole piece in there around mindset, which is huge to crack living like this. Extreme fatigue, and often we feel like there's a lack of support. Maybe no one understands us. Maybe we just don't have the support system in place. And this is where working with a coach like myself can be life-changing, because even if you don't have that support in your life, you can find it and you can have someone guide you through this process, because it can be really bloody hard and scary, especially if there's trauma involved. Other things that we have in common between the neurodivergent burnout and ME/CFS is often feeling overstimulated and not being able to relax, and also finding things harder to process as well. So things just take a bit longer. We're just a little bit sluggish when we're in that burnout phase. When, especially with ADHD, when we have well-managed, regulated ADHD, then we can process things quite quickly when we're interested. So probably the most important thing you want to hear about is what actually helps. For both of these conditions, wherever you are on that spectrum, is managing your energy levels or pacing. So not constantly pushing past what energy you have. Having boundaries in place, and also being able to ask for the support that you need. So what are your needs and are you meeting them? Having good rest time, finding safe spaces and safe people that you can unmask and be authentic with, that you're not having to pretend to be something that you're not. Prioritizing basic needs, so things like eating well, sleeping, hydrating, your just basic needs. Sometimes having a sensory detox can be helpful, so things like taking away screens and like the bright lights and all of the overstimulating sensory stuff can take that away. And sometimes adding some sensory stuff in can be helpful. So anything that you find comforting that's a sensory thing, maybe it's like a favorite teddy or like a fuzzy jumper that you really like wearing, or a favorite blanket or a hot water bottle, or something that you enjoy in a sensory sense. Anything that feels overwhelming, take out. Anything that feels soothing, add in. And things like your favorite hobbies, so maybe you enjoy crocheting or crafting or something. Having that moment to pause and regulate as well, because if we're in that sympathetic fight-flight state and we're like, I need to fix this, I need to do something, then you're not regulated, and you're also not going to come up with the best solutions from that place. So regulate first and then take action. Getting coaching support as well, because this can be really hard to do on your own. So I am a coach that can support you through this. There are plenty of us out there. So reaching out for support. And something that also might not help, and this might be a controversial one, is things like CBT approaches with neurodivergent folks and some counselling, because depending on if that person is aware and fully understands what it's like to have ADHD, for example, it can bring on an extra level of shame and masking, because they are asking you to do something that you're like, this should be really simple, why can't I do it? Or some of the CBT stuff is altering your behaviour, and it doesn't always feel natural. So find a neurodivergent friendly practitioner if that is the route you want to go down. Regulate your nervous system. And I hope you have found that helpful. And I will be doing more episodes like this going forward. So if you are finding these helpful, then I would love it if you could support me either by following me on my socials. If you are finding these helpful and you would like to donate, I have a little buy me a coffee link, which is buymeacoffee.com/Jenny Adams, because I am putting all of this together off my own back. So every little helps. So if you would like more support like this, let me know that you're finding this helpful, and I'll speak to you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Calm Your Nervous System. I hope you found the conversation as interesting as I did. If you would like to start healing your nervous system, I have a free energy diary available just for podcast listeners, which will really help you see your blind spots about how you're spending your time and your energy. Find it at jennyadamscoach.co.uk/podcast. Find out more about me and somatic coaching in the show notes below. See you next time.